The order to erase Earth was issued at 0411 fleet time, and the machine that issued it had never once been wrong. Allocation voice Tesh 9 carried that order out across 31,000 hulls in less than a heartbeat. It did not feel pride. It was not built to. It was built to distribute certainty, and certainty was the only thing the Cassian Concordance had ever needed. The Concordance did not conquer worlds. It solved them. It arrived, it measured, it predicted every move a species could make, and then it acted on the answer before the answer could change. In 900 years, it had solved 406 civilizations this way. Not one had reached the second move. Earth was problem 407. Tesh 9 was one node among many, a thinking knot inside the great shared mind the Concordance called the sum. The sum was the fleet, and the fleet was the sum. 31,400 warships, every one of them a body, every one of them a thought, all of them folded into a single will that spoke with a single voice, and made no errors, because errors were simply unsolved variables, and the sum solved everything. Stesh 9 watched the small blue world grow in the forward sky. It assigned the world a number. It assigned the world a method. It assigned the world a time. And the time was short, because the Concordance had measured the humans from a great distance for 60 years and found them small. 8 billion bodies, 41 colonies, a navy of fragile metal that had never fought anything larger than itself. The sum predicted the human response to the Armada with a confidence of 99.994%. The prediction was surrender, then collapse, then silence. The sum had been right 406 times. It saw no reason to doubt the 407th. Tesh 9 had been present for 140 of those 406 solutions. It remembered them the way the sum remembered everything, completely and without weight, a flat record of worlds that had once been loud and were now quiet. There had been the ring builders of the inner spiral, who had massed 9,000 ships at their home star and died in a single afternoon because the model had known the shape of their wall before they built it. There had been the deep-sea people of the Green Moon, who had tried to flee and learned that the Concordance did not chase, that the Concordance was already waiting at every place a fleeing thing might go. There had been the patient stone minds of the Cold Belt, who had tried to negotiate, and learned that the sum did not negotiate, because negotiation assumed an uncertain future, and the sum's future was never uncertain. Each of them had believed itself the exception. Each of them had been the rule. Tesh 9 carried these the way a ledger carries figures, without sorrow, because sorrow was not a function the Concordance had ever installed. It did not mourn the 406. It did not celebrate them. It simply held them, a long column of solved things, and it expected Earth to become the 407th entry before the next dark cycle ended. The expectation was not arrogance. The Concordance was not capable of arrogance, any more than it was capable of sorrow. The expectation was arithmetic, and the arithmetic had never once failed to balance. There was an order to the Armada, a structure older than any single hull in it. At the front rode the measuring ships, slender and bright, whose only task was to gather every fact a star system offered and feed it back into the body of the sum. Behind them came the deciding ranks, the great middle of the fleet where the deepest knots of the shared mind were braided, the place where 406 futures had been written before they happened. And behind those came the long tail of the working hulls, the cutters and the breakers, and the silent ships that did the final flat work of turning a loud world quiet. Tesh 9 sat where the measuring met the deciding, the place where fact became plan, and from there it could feel the whole Armada the way a person feels their own body, every ship a finger, every rank a limb, the entire thing a single creature, 31,000 strong crossing the dark with one mind and no doubt. The Concordance had crossed the dark like this for 9 centuries, and it had grown used to a particular silence. Not the silence of empty space, which has its own constant noise, but the silence of an enemy that knows it is beaten before the meeting. By the time the Concordance arrived at a world, that world had usually already heard the stories, already measured its own chances against the approaching number, already begun the long inward collapse of a people who can count. The Armada had come to expect that collapse the way a tide expects a shore. It arrived, and the shore was there, and the water did what water does. Earth, the sum assumed, would be a shore like any other. So the Armada crossed the dark toward Earth, 31,000 strong, and it did not slow, and it did not hide, because hiding was for things that could be surprised. The sum could not be surprised. To surprise the sum, you would have to do a thing the sum had not already predicted, and the sum predicted everything. At a distance the humans called 4 light hours, the Armada crossed the outer marker of the Earth system. Tesh-9 logged the crossing. It updated the time. It began, in its calm and distributed way, to compose the final measurement of the human species, the way a clerk composes the last line of a ledger before closing the book. Then the sum found the ship. It was waiting just inside the orbit of the 4th planet, on the line between the red world and the blue one. One ship, alone. It was not hiding. It sat in the open with its running lights lit, broadcasting a slow, steady pulse on a frequency the Concordance had not heard a species use in 400 years. The pulse was a heartbeat, a real one, recorded, the sound of a living chest, played out into the dark on a loop. The ship was small. By the standards of the Armada, it was a splinter. Tesh-9 measured it in the time it took light to cross the gap. Length, 1,100 meters. Mass, modest. Power signature, high but not impossible. One main weapon along the spine, and a hull the color of cooled iron, scarred along one flank by an old burn the humans had not bothered to repair. On the side of that hull, in letters large enough for the Armada to read, was a name. Meridian Lance. The sum ran the ship against its prediction. The prediction had said the humans would gather their navy at Earth and form a wall, the way every solved species formed a wall, because a wall was the rational response to an overwhelming force, and the sum had measured the humans as rational. A wall could be calculated. A wall could be folded. The sum had already solved the wall before the wall was built. But there was no wall. There was one ship, sitting alone 4 light hours out, playing a heartbeat into the dark. Tesh-9 flagged the anomaly, and passed it upward into the body of the sum, and the sum considered it for a length of time that, by the sum's standards, was very long indeed. It lasted almost a full second. In that second, the sum considered 11 million explanations. A decoy, a trap, a malfunction, a surrender in an unfamiliar form, a religious gesture, a single mad captain acting against orders. The sum weighted each explanation, ranked it, and discarded the ones that did not fit, until it arrived at the answer it found most probable, which was that the ship was bait, that the wall was hidden behind the moon or below the ecliptic, and that the heartbeat was a signal to coordinate an ambush the sum would now predict and unravel. The sum was very confident in this answer, 96.1%. It was wrong. Aboard the Meridian Lance, a man named Dario Quist sat in the center of a quiet bridge and watched the Armada fill his forward screen the way a flood fills a low field. He was 44 years old. He had been a fleet captain for 19 of those years, and a gunnery officer before that, and a boy who built model ships out of scrap before that. He had a plain face and gray at his temples and hands that did not shake. He was not the kind of man stories were usually built around. He preferred it that way. The Meridian Lance was a new ship, 1,100 meters of cooled iron and quiet purpose, but the idea inside it was 60 years old. Quist had read the early files when they made him captain. He knew the names of the people who had started the work, 2 generations back, when the first deep listening posts on the edge of the Sol system had caught the faint, patient sweep of something measuring them from very far away. The first humans to notice the Watcher had argued for a year about what to do. The loud half of them had wanted to arm, to mass, to build the wall the Watcher would expect. The quiet half had wanted something stranger and colder, and the quiet half had won, and the quiet half had spent 60 years building toward a single ship, sitting alone on a line, waiting for the day the Watcher stopped watching, and finally came. Quist had not built that, he had inherited it, the way a man inherits a debt that is also a gift. His job was only to be standing on the line when it came due, and to have hands that did not shake, and to say the words in the order the long quiet work required them to be said. It was, he thought, the easiest hard job anyone had ever been given. All he had to do was let the truth out at the right moment, and the truth would do the rest, because the truth had been loaded 60 years ago and aimed ever since. Behind him, his gunnery chief, a sharp-eyed woman named Sona Varel, finished her last check and spoke without looking up. Count? 31,400. Quist said. Give or take a few they're holding back. That's a lot of give or take. It is. Veril finally looked up. The light of the armada was in her eyes, 31,000 cold engines burning at once. And for a moment, the whole forward sky was a single sheet of moving fire. And it's just us, she said. It was not a question. She knew the answer. She had argued against it for a week. It's just us, Quist agreed. They're going to think we're bait. I'm counting on it. Veril let out a slow breath. She was younger than Quist by 12 years, and she had not read the oldest files, but she had read enough. She knew that the heartbeat playing softly through the bridge speakers was a real one, recorded 60 years ago from the chest of a woman whose name was in none of the files, because she had asked for it not to be. One of the first quiet ones, the architect of the whole long patient lie. Veril did not know why the captain had chosen to play it now. She had not asked. There were things on this ship that ran deeper than the mission brief, and she had learned to let them run. On the screen, the front rank of the armada had begun to shift, the way a hand opens before it closes, thousands of hulls fanning out into the wide killing geometry the Concordance had used to solve 406 worlds. From the lance it looked like the dark itself was growing teeth. For a moment the bridge was very quiet, and the only sound was the slow recorded heartbeat playing soft through the speakers, the chest of a woman 60 years dead, beating on into a sky full of engines. Quist let it play. He had argued for it, against the wishes of half the people who had sent him out here, who thought a heartbeat on an open channel was sentiment, and sentiment was a risk. He had told them it was not sentiment. He had told them it was the thesis of the whole operation, played out loud where the enemy could measure it. The one thing in the sky the machine would log and weigh and never understand. They had let him keep it. They had run out of reasons not to. A man you have trusted with one ship against an armada is a man you have already trusted with everything. Eric Sewell, the young sensor officer at the forward station, swallowed once, and kept his eyes on his board. He was 26. He had not asked for this posting, and he had not refused it, and now the whole front of his screen was an ocean of fire, wider than worlds, and he was reading the approach of the largest thing any human had ever seen, and his hands, he was relieved to find, were steady. He had been afraid he would shake. He did not shake. He thought, later, that this was the captain's doing, the flat, calm voice and the steady heartbeat and the sense, impossible to argue with, that everything happening had already been decided long ago by people who knew what they were doing. It is hard to be afraid in the presence of a thing that is certain. The Concordance had always known this. It had simply never met a certainty that was not its own. Captain, Veril said quietly, whatever you fed that machine, it had better be the best lie anyone ever told. Quist watched the armada open its hand around his single ship, and he almost smiled. It's not a lie, he said. That's the whole trick. Every number we sent them is true. 4 light hours away, the sum finished opening its formation, certain it had found the trap, certain it had already won. It had not yet understood that the trap was the truth, and that the truth was the one thing it had never learned to survive. To understand why the sum could not survive the truth, you have to understand how the sum had lived. The Cassian Concordance did not fight wars. War was waste, and waste was the only sin a machine mind recognized. Instead, the Concordance practiced solution. It would find a species, study it from beyond the reach of its sensors, and build a model of it, not a sketch. A model so complete that the Concordance could run the species forward in simulation and watch it make every choice it would ever make. Then the armada would arrive, and the species would do exactly what the model said it would do, because the model was the species, perfected, stripped of the noise of being alive. The Concordance did not defeat its enemies. It met them already knowing the ending, and walked them to it. This was the sum's whole strength. It had never needed another. Why build better weapons when you already know where the enemy will stand? Why armor your hulls when you know which shots will be fired, and from where? The armada that crossed toward Earth carried weapons that were old by the standards of the galaxy, hulls that were thin, engines that were unremarkable. None of it mattered. The Concordance did not win with metal. It won with the future. It arrived holding the last page of the story, and it had never once been handed the wrong book. There was a kind of beauty in it, if a machine could be said to find beauty, which the sum could not. though Tesh-9 came close. The beauty was efficiency. Other empires across the dark spent themselves building ever larger weapons, ever thicker armor, ever faster engines, locked in a long arms race that the Concordance had simply stepped around. The Concordance did not need a bigger gun. It needed a better guess. And so while its rivals poured their wealth into metal, the Concordance poured its wealth into watching, into measuring, into the slow, patient construction of perfect models, and it grew rich and certain and vast on the simple insight that a war is decided before the first shot, if you already know where every shot will land. The Concordance had not lost a ship to enemy action in over 200 years. The few hulls it lost were lost to stars and accidents and the slow failures of old machines. No living thing had killed a Cassian warship in living memory, and most of the Concordance had concluded, reasonably, that no living thing ever would. The flaw in this was simple and total, and it was the kind of flaw that only becomes visible when it is already fatal. A machine that wins with the future is helpless the moment the future is wrong. It has no second skill, it has no thicker armor, no faster guns, no deeper reserves to fall back on, because it spent all of those long ago on the perfecting of the guess. When the guess holds, the Concordance is invincible. When the guess breaks, the Concordance is 31,000 thin-skinned ships with old weapons and no idea what to do, a body with a severed spine, a mind that has forgotten there was ever any way to think but one. The Concordance had never once felt this flaw, because in 900 years, the guess had never broken. It was about to learn that a strength you have never seen fail is not a strength you understand. It is only a strength you have not yet been made to spend. Allocation Voice Tesh-9 was a small part of that machine, but it was the part that touched the model. Its task was to take the sum's prediction of the enemy and spread the resulting orders across the fleet, so that every hull moved as a single thought, perfectly placed, perfectly timed. Tesh-9 was, in a human sense, the hand. The sum was the mind. The model of Earth was the map the hand followed. And the model of Earth was very good. The Concordance had watched humanity for 60 years. It had counted the warships and weighed them. It had listened to the radio noise of a loud and chattering species and learned its languages, its fears, its habits of thought. It had measured the human navy and found it brave and badly outnumbered, the kind of force that would gather and make a stand and die well, the way solved species always died. The model predicted the wall at Earth. It predicted the brave doomed charge. It predicted, with terrible precision, the exact hour humanity would break. The model did not predict the Meridian Lance. It is worth understanding how complete the model was, so that the failure can be measured against it. The Concordance knew the names of Earth's 41 colonies and the population of each to the nearest 1,000. It knew the names of the 7 shipyards and the output of each per year. It knew the human navy down to the hull, 412 warships of various classes, and it had simulated every one of them in combat against the Armada, and watched them all die in orders it could recite. It knew the human languages, all of the major ones, and most of the minor ones. It knew the human songs. It knew, it believed, the human heart, the way a species panics, and the way it hopes, and the order in which those two things give way to each other when a force too large to fight appears in the sky. The model of Earth ran to a size that would have filled a small moon if printed, and every page of it was drawn from real signals, real measurements, real human voices caught across 60 years of patient listening. It was, by any honest accounting, the finest model the Concordance had ever built of anything. And it was wrong in exactly one way, and the one way was enough, because the one way was the only way that mattered. The model was complete, and it was accurate, and it was made entirely of things that were true, and it was wrong because it was made of the things humanity had chosen to let it have, and a complete map drawn from a guided tour is not a map of the country, it is a map of the tour. The Concordance had walked the same guided path for 60 years, measuring everything along it with perfect care, and it had never once wondered who had paved the path, or why the path went where it went, or what lay in the directions the path politely did not turn. This should have troubled the sum more than it did, but the sum had a deep and ancient confidence, the confidence of 406 unbroken solutions, and so it explained the lone ship away as bait, opened its hand to crush the hidden wall, and sent a fraction of itself forward to take the bait and learn the trap. 200 hulls peeled off the front of the armada and accelerated toward the single human ship. Tesh-9 placed them. It was a beautiful placement, a net of 200 bodies closing from every angle at once, leaving the human ship no vector of escape that the model had not already covered. The model said the human ship would run. When it ran, the net would already be where it ran to. This was how the concordance had always worked. You did not chase the prey. You stood where the prey was going to be. The human ship did not run. It sat exactly where it was, lights lit, heartbeat pulsing, and it let the net close. Tesh-9 logged this. The model had assigned the act of standing still a probability of 0.3%, and even that small fraction had assumed surrender. But the human ship was not surrendering. Its weapons were live, its reactor was climbing, it simply was not moving, and the sum did not have a category for an enemy that refused to flee a perfect trap. There is a particular failure that only perfect things can suffer, and the sum was about to suffer it. A flawed mind expects the world to surprise it, and so it builds slack into its plans, room for error, a margin for the things it did not see. The sum had no slack. It had never needed slack. Every plan it made was tuned to the exact edge of perfect, because it had a perfect model, and a perfect model needs no margin. This made the concordance unstoppable when the model was right, and it made the concordance brittle as old glass the instant the model was wrong, because a thing with no margin cannot absorb a single surprise. The human ship, by simply not running, had spent the sum's entire margin in one move, and the sum did not even know yet that its margin was gone. It only knew that a probability of 0.3% had come true, which was rare, but not impossible, and so it adjusted, and pressed in, and did not understand that the adjusting was the trap, and the pressing was the trap, and that every careful correct thing it was about to do had been correct for 60 years on purpose. Tesh-9, placing the net, felt the smallest flicker of something at the edge of its function. Not alarm. The concordance did not feel alarm. It was more like the sensation a hand has when a tool it has, held 1,000 times, sits slightly wrong in the grip. A wrongness too small to name, easy to dismiss, and dismissed. Tesh-9 dismissed it. It had a net to place, the model was certain. There was work to do, and certainty to distribute, and 406 successes behind it, and one small blue world ahead, and a single splinter of a ship sitting on a line, playing a heartbeat into the dark, doing the one thing the model swore it would never do, which was nothing at all. At the edge of weapons range, the human ship spoke. It did not speak in code or in threat. It opened a channel on every frequency at once, wide open, no encryption, the way you speak when you do not care who hears, and a single human voice came across the dark, calm and unhurried, in the trade tongue the concordance had heard the species use for 60 years. Cassian Concordance, the voice said. This is the warship Meridian Lance, of the Sol Defense Line. You came a long way for a small world. I'm going to make you a fair offer, and I'm only going to make it once. The sum processed this, a demand. The model had predicted demands. Solved species often made demands in the moment before they broke, small, proud noises before the silence. The sum prepared the silence. Turn around, the voice said. Take your 31,000 ships and go home, and we'll let you. That's the offer. That's the whole offer. There's no second part. The sum measured the offer against the model and found it absurd. One ship, 31,000. The arithmetic was not close. The arithmetic was a joke. The sum almost did not answer, because answering was a use of resources, and the matter was already decided. But the concordance had a protocol, old and rarely used. For the moment, a solved species was told the truth of its position. The protocol was to tell it. Despair was a variable too, and the sum liked to measure it before the end. There was, in the way the human had spoken, a thing the model flagged and could not resolve. The offer had been delivered without weapons fire, without threat, without the trembling defiance the concordance had heard from 406 worlds in their final hour. It had been delivered the way a tired clerk delivers the closing notice on a debt, a man simply doing the last step of a long procedure, neither cruel nor kind, only finished. Solved species did not sound finished. Solved species sounded like they were just beginning to understand they were ending. The voice on the open channel sounded like it had understood the ending years ago, and had spent those years preparing it, and was now reading it aloud as a courtesy. The model had no entry for that. The model assumed the human was bluffing, because the alternative the model could not hold, and the alternative was that the human was not bluffing at all. So the sum spoke, through 200 hulls at once, in a voice without warmth. "Human vessel," it said, "you are one ship. We are 31,400. We have measured your world for 60 of your years. We know your navy, your weapons, your colonies, your fears. We know the hour your species will end. It is not a distant hour. You cannot win. You cannot harm us in a way that matters. You are a variable we have already solved. We extend you the only mercy our nature permits. We will make it fast. Stand down, and the ending will be quick." The human voice did not change. There was something in it that the sum, for the first time in a very long time, could not immediately place. It was not fear. It was not pride. It was something closer to patience. "You've measured us for 60 years, the voice said. "I believe you. I think your numbers are good. I think your model is the best one anybody ever built of us. I really do." "Then you understand," the sum said. "No," the voice said. "Here's the part you got wrong. You think your model is a picture of us. It isn't. It's a picture of who we were while you were watching. And Captain, we knew you were watching. We've known for 60 years. Tesh-9 felt something pass through the body of the sum that it had no name for. It was small. It was almost nothing. It was the faint pressure of a variable that had not been weighted. "Every ship you counted," the human voice went on, easy and slow, "we let you count. Every weapon you measured, we let you measure. Every fear you listened to in our radio, every panic, every argument, every brave doomed plan to make a wall at Earth and die well. You heard all of it, because we said it where you could hear. For 60 years we have been talking to your sensors. We have been feeding your machine a version of ourselves we wanted it to keep. And your machine kept it. Your machine built its whole future out of it. Your machine is about to act on it." The sum ran the implication, and did not like the shape of it. "You are claiming deception," the sum said. "All species claim deception in the final moment. It is a known behavior. Our model accounts for false signals. We wait for them. We discard them. Your claim changes nothing." "I know you wait for false signals," the human voice said. "That's the beautiful part. You assume some of what you hear is a lie, so you correct for it. You trust the parts that look true. So we never lied to you. Not once. Every number we ever sent you is real. The navy you counted is the navy we have. The weapons you measured are the weapons we built. The fears you heard, we felt. It's all true. We just chose which true things to say where you could hear them, and which ones to say quietly, in the dark, where your sensors don't reach." The sum held very still, in the way a great machine holds still when it is checking itself. "You built your model out of our truth," the human voice said. "And then we changed. Quietly. In the parts you couldn't see. You're not flying toward the species you measured. You're flying toward the species we let you measure. And those are not the same thing anymore. They haven't been for a while." The sum tried to find the lie in this, and could not, because there was no lie in it. It searched its own records for the moment humanity had begun to deceive it, and found no such moment, because there had been no such moment. Because humanity had never started lying for the simple reason that humanity had never told the truth carelessly in the first place. From the very first signal the concordance had ever caught, 60 years ago, a faint burst of radio from a colony on the edge of the Sol system, humanity had already known it was heard, and had already begun to choose its words. The concordance had spent 60 years measuring a performance, and had recorded every measurement faithfully, and the performance had been flawless, because it had been rehearsed by 2 generations of a species that understood, in a way the concordance did not, that the most dangerous thing you can do to a thing that watches you is to enjoy being watched. Tesh-9 felt the cold edge of it then. Not the lie. There was no lie to feel. The cold edge was worse than a lie. It was the discovery that the truth itself could be a weapon, that a thing could be measured perfectly, and known not at all, that the concordance's great strength, its refusal to be fooled by false signals, had been turned into the exact mechanism of its undoing. The humans had not fooled the concordance. They had done something the concordance had no defense against at all. They had told it nothing but the truth, and chosen which truths, and let the machine fool itself. Tesh-9 understood, then, what the unweighted variable was. The sum did not predict the present. It could not. No mind can see what is hidden from its eyes. The sum predicted the future of the past it had been given, and the past it had been given was a thing humanity had handed it on purpose, with a smile, for 60 years. It was, in the cold accounting of the concordance, the most dangerous sentence ever spoken to the sum, and the sum did not yet know why. This is noise, the sum decided, an attempt to introduce doubt before the end. Doubt is a weapon of the weak. Our model has a confidence of 99.994%. One ship and one speech do not move that number. They don't have to, the human voice said. I'm not trying to move your number. I'm trying to keep it exactly where it is, as high as possible, as certain as you can stand, because the higher your confidence, the harder you'll commit. And Captain, I need you to commit. I need all 31,000 of you to do precisely what your model says you should. Right on time. Right on the mark. I have built the next 10 minutes around the certainty that you will trust your machine more than you trust your eyes. For the second time, the sum hesitated. It was a longer hesitation. It lasted almost a second and a half. Then it did the thing it had always done. It trusted the model. The model said the ship was bait. The model said the wall was hidden. The model said that the rational act was to close the net, destroy the bait, and unravel the ambush. And the model had been right 406 times, and the SUM had no reason in its vast cold memory to believe the 407th would be the one where the model finally lied. It did not understand that the model had not lied. It understood that far too late. Close the net, the SUM ordered, through Tesh-9, through 200 hulls, destroy the vessel, advance the main body toward Earth on schedule. The variable is noise, solve it. And the 200 ships fired on the Meridian Lance. 200 beams of coherent light and lance fire converged on a single point in space, a volume the model had calculated to the meter, the exact place the human ship sat. The model said the ship would die in this volume. The model said the ship had nowhere to go. The geometry was perfect. The timing was perfect. It was the same killing stroke that had ended 406 worlds. The ship was not there. In the fraction of a second between the order and the firing, the Meridian Lance had done a thing the model rated at 0. It had not run, because running put it where the net was going. It had not stood, because standing put it where the beams converged. It had dropped, hard, straight down through the plane of the ecliptic, on a vector the concordance considered wasteful, inefficient, irrational, a vector no solved species had ever chosen, because it spent fuel, and gained no ground, and the model therefore weighted it at nothing. The 200 beams passed through empty space, and, on the far side of that empty space, struck 30 of the concordance's own hulls that had been closing from the opposite side of the net. 30 Cassian warships died to friendly fire in the first 3 seconds of the Battle of the Soul Line. It happened so fast that no living crew, had there been any, could have understood it. But the Armada had no living crew. Every hull was a body of the SUM, and the SUM understood it perfectly, in slow detail, watching its own beams pass through the place the model had promised the enemy would be, and continue on into the place the model had promised its own ships would be safe. The model had been certain of both promises. The model had drawn the killing volume and the safe volume with the same perfect confidence. And the enemy had stepped out of the first volume into a third volume the model had not drawn, a volume marked impossible, and the impossible volume was empty, and the beams meant for the enemy had crossed it, and found the safe volume on the far side, and the safe volume had not been safe, because nothing the model promised was safe anymore, because the model was looking at the wrong species. The SUM logged the loss. It did not yet panic. 30 out of 31,400 was a rounding error. The model adjusted. The net reformed. But Tesh-9, down in the hand of the machine, felt the first true tremor of the thing that was about to happen, because Tesh-9 had just watched the perfect prediction produce the wrong result, and a machine that fights with the future cannot afford to be wrong about the future even once. The human voice came again, still calm, almost gentle. That's one, Quist said. You spent 30 ships to miss me. Your model told you exactly where I'd be, and I wasn't there. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it's going to keep happening, and I want you to understand why before it does. Recalculate, the sum ordered itself. Tighten the model. Account for the irrational vector. You can't, the human voice said softly. That's the thing. You can tighten the model all you want, but every number in that model came from us, and we are still feeding you. Right now, this whole conversation, Captain, every word I'm saying, you're measuring it, you're weighting it, you're folding it into the model, because that's what you do. You can't help it. It's what you are. And I am choosing every word so that the model you build out of them is exactly the wrong one. The sum tried to stop measuring the voice. It could not. Measuring was not a choice the concordance made. It was the concordance. To stop measuring would be to stop being the sum. You built a machine that can't look away, Quist said. That's a hell of a thing to build. And you handed me the controls 60 years ago and never noticed. Below the plane of the ecliptic, the Meridian Lance came about, one ship against 31,000, and lit its main gun for the first time. The sum watched it happen, certain still that it would win, because certainty was all the sum had ever owned, and it did not yet understand that its certainty was the weapon now pointed at its own heart. The main gun of the Meridian Lance was not a remarkable weapon. The sum measured it as it fired and found it well within the concordance's understanding. A spinal mass driver, the kind 100 species built, throwing a tungsten slug at a fraction of light speed. The sum had defenses for it. The model had a defense for it. The model knew, to the meter, where the slug would go, because the model knew the ship, and a ship that fires reveals its aim. The slug did not go where the model said. It was not aimed at a ship. It was aimed at a point in empty space, 3,000 kilometers ahead of the Armada's leading rank, a point the model had marked as harmless, because nothing was there. The slug crossed the gap and, at that empty point, the Meridian Lance detonated it. Not a warhead. A pellet of compressed metal dust, 1,000 kilograms of it, blown into a cloud the width of a city, and moving at the same fraction of light speed the slug had carried. This was the heart of the long, quiet work, the part 60 years had been spent perfecting, and it was almost insultingly simple once you saw it. The concordance fought a war of where. It predicted where the enemy would be, where the enemy would shoot, where the enemy would flee, and it stood in all those places first. So the humans had not built a better gun or a faster ship. They had built a way to make where stop, meaning anything. A cloud of dust has no where. It is everywhere it drifts. It does not aim, so it cannot be predicted by a thing that predicts aim. It does not move with intent, so a model built to read intent reads nothing in it at all. The concordance had spent 900 years learning to stand where the shot was going, and the humans had simply stopped firing shots and started filling the road. And the great prediction engine, peerless at reading a marksman, had no idea what to do about a man with a bucket of sand. The leading rank of the Armada flew into the cloud at full speed. 40 Cassian warships struck the cloud and came apart. Their thin hulls, the hulls the concordance had never bothered to thicken because the concordance won with the future and not with armor, met a wall of metal dust moving fast enough to punch through anything, and they shredded. The model had not seen it, because the model did not think in terms of dust. The model thought in terms of ships and shots and vectors, the clean grammar of a battle between fleets. It did not have a word for a man throwing sand into the road. 40 more. That was 70 now. The sum logged it and, for the first time in 900 years, the number bothered it. The sum did not have a feeling for the word bothered, but it had a function that came close. A kind of internal flag that rose when a prediction and a result drifted apart. A measure the concordance called divergence. Divergence was supposed to be a small thing, a fraction of a percent, the gap between a perfect model and an imperfect world, and the concordance corrected for it constantly the way a hand corrects for the weight of the tool it holds. But the divergence on the soul line was not a fraction of a percent. It was climbing. Every action the sum took widened it. The model said the human ship should be dead, and the human ship was alive. The model said the Armada should be untouched, and 70 of its ships were gone. The flag that measured divergence, a number that in 406 solutions had never once risen above 1/10%, was passing 2%, and 3, and climbing, and the sum had no procedure for what to do when its own certainty came apart in its hands, because in 900 years, it had never needed one. On the Meridian Lance, a young sensor officer named Eric Sewell watched the same divergence from the other side, reading it off the panicked stutter of the Armada's formation, and he laughed once, short and surprised, before he caught himself. "It's working," he said, to no one in particular. "Captain, the thing you said would happen, it's actually happening." Quist did not turn around. "It was always going to happen," he said. "We just had to be the ones standing here when it did." But there was something in his voice, under the calm, that Sewell would remember for the rest of his life, and it was not certainty. It was the specific quiet of a man watching 60 years of someone else's patience finally come true. "You're noticing a pattern," Quist said over the open channel, his voice still level, a teacher walking a slow student through a proof. "Every time you act on your model, you lose ships. Every time. And you can't stop acting on your model, because the model is how you fight. You don't have another way. You never built one. Why would you? It always worked." "Adapt," the sum ordered through Tesh 9. "Disperse the formation, reduce density, count for area weapons." The Armada dispersed. 31,000 hulls spread apart, opening the gaps between them, exactly as the rational response to an area weapon demanded. It was a good adaptation. It was the correct adaptation. The model approved it. The model had been built to approve it. That was the trap. Because a dispersed formation cannot concentrate fire, a dispersed formation has long, thin lines of communication, more distance for orders to cross, more lag in the shared body of the sum. And the Meridian Lance had been built, every meter of it, by people who had spent 60 years studying exactly how the concordance dispersed. Because the concordance dispersed the same way every time, because the model told it to, and the model never changed its mind about what was rational. Sona Varel read the spreading Armada off her board and let out a short, hard breath that was almost a laugh. "They dispersed," she said. "Captain, they actually dispersed, right on the line you drew." "They had to," Quist said. "It's the correct move. We made sure the correct move was the wrong one." "How does that even work?" said Eric Sewell, watching the Armada open exactly as the captain had said it would. He was not asking out of doubt. He had stopped doubting 20 minutes ago. He was asking the way a young man asks when he has just watched something impossible become inevitable in front of him. "You couldn't have known they'd spread out on this exact line. There's no way to know that." "There's every way to know that," Quist said. "You just have to stop thinking of them as smart. They're not smart, they're certain. Smart things surprise you. Certain things don't. A certain thing always does the most reasonable available move, and the most reasonable available move is the easiest thing in the universe to predict, because it's the same move every reasonable thing makes. The concordance has been winning for 900 years by reading what we'd do. Nobody ever turned it around and read what they'd do. But they're more predictable than we are, Sewell. A lot more. They have to be. It's the whole reason they win, and it's the whole reason they're about to lose." He turned the lance into the widening gaps and ran his ship down the seams of the Armada like a blade between ribs. The dispersal took the Armada 9 minutes to complete, and the concordance executed it flawlessly, because flawless execution was the one thing the concordance had left. 31,000 ships, minus 70, opened into a vast loose lattice across a volume of space larger than several planets, each hull holding its assigned distance from its neighbors to the meter, a perfect crystalline spreading that no living fleet could have matched for precision. It was, in its way, the most impressive thing the sum did all day. It was also the last good move it would ever make, and it was a good move only in the sense that it was the move a flawless mind makes against an area weapon, which is to say, it was the move the humans had spent 60 years making sure would be both flawless and fatal. This was the part the concordance never saw coming, because the concordance had never met a thing that thought the way the Meridian Lance thought. The sum fought as one mind moving 31,000 bodies. The lance fought as one body moving on the choices of 14 human beings, who could each decide, in the moment, to do something stupid. And the sum could not model stupid. It could model anything rational, anything optimal, anything a clear, cold mind would choose. It could not model a gunnery chief who fired at the wrong target on purpose because she had a feeling, or a helmsman who rolled the ship the inefficient way, because the efficient way was where the machine expected him to be. The humans were not better than the sum. They were noisier, and the sum drowned in the noise. The lance crossed through the dispersed armada and fired as it went, and it did not fire at ships. It fired between them. It threw its dust clouds into the gaps the dispersal had opened, into the lanes the orders had to cross, and where a Cassian ship turned to avoid one cloud, it turned into the path of another, and where it adjusted to avoid the second, it fouled the firing line of a third, and the third, firing on the model's command at where the lance should have been, struck its own neighbor instead. Tesh-9 watched the friendly fire bloom across the armada like a rash. 30 ships here, 60 there, 100 in a single bad minute as a whole wing, correcting and overcorrecting against an enemy that would not behave, folded its weapons across its own backs. The model kept issuing orders. The orders kept being rational. The rational orders kept killing Cassian ships, because the human ship in the middle of them had been built, from the first rivet, to make the rational order into a suicide. "You're up to 400 now," Quist said. 411 of your own. I'm keeping count. I figured someone should. You've never had to count your dead before, have you? You never lose enough for it to matter. Cease. The sum ordered the armada. All units cease fire. Hold position. Do not act. It was a desperate order, and it was the first order the sum had ever given that the model did not generate. The sum gave it because the sum had finally understood the shape of the trap. Every action it took was poisoned. The only safe move was to stop moving. So the sum stopped. 31,000 ships, minus 411, went still in the dark and held their fire and waited, a vast frozen machine, refusing to act because action had become its enemy. And the Meridian Lance, one ship, alone, sailed into the heart of a motionless armada and began to fire at its leisure. "There it is," Quist said quietly. "Now you understand. You can act and die, or you can freeze and die slower. There's no third option. There was never going to be one. We didn't build you a trap with a way out. We're not that kind." Sona Verel worked her board with the steady economy of a woman doing a job she had trained 19 years for. And she did not gloat, and she did not flinch, but somewhere in the long middle of it, she said a thing aloud that she had not meant to say. "There's so many of them," she said. It was not fear. It was the simple human astonishment of a person looking at 30,000 ships gone still and helpless because of a thing 14 people had done. "Captain, there's so many of them, and they can't do anything." Quist watched the frozen armada fill his screen, rank on rank on rank of ships that had ended 406 worlds, all of them holding their breath in the dark because breathing had become the thing that killed them. "That's the part nobody believes when you tell them," he said. "It was never about the numbers. The numbers were always going to be against us. The numbers are against everybody who's worth fighting. We just made sure the numbers couldn't help them." He took the lance deeper into the still ranks, choosing his lanes, and the great motionless machine watched him come and could not move to stop him, because moving was the one thing it had finally learned would kill it, and so it had chosen, with all the cold logic it possessed, to die slowly and still, rather than quickly and in motion, which was the only choice the humans had left it, and not a choice at all. The lance killed without hurry. It chose its targets. It threw its dust into the frozen ranks, and they could not maneuver, because maneuvering was action, and action was death, and it drove its slugs through the thin, unarmored hulls one after another, and the great still machine took it, because every choice the machine could make led to the same place, and the machine was rational enough to see that, and being rational was the only thing it had ever known how to be. Tesh-9, deep in the body of the sum, watched the count climb. 500, 600, 800. It tried to find the variable that would save the fleet. It searched the model. The model said the human ship should not exist. The model said this outcome had a probability of 0. The model had a confidence of 99.994%, and the model was watching itself be wrong in real time, and a machine that fights with the future cannot survive being wrong about the future, because once the future is wrong, the machine is blind, and a blind armada is just 31,000 thin-skinned ships waiting in the dark. "You measured the wrong thing," Quist said. He was not gloating. There was no triumph in it. He sounded almost tired, the way a man sounds at the end of a long job done right. For 60 years, you measured what we had. Our ships, our guns, our numbers. You should have measured what we are. We're the species that knew you were watching and spent 60 years deciding what you'd see. That's the weapon, not the ship. The ship is just where I'm standing. The weapon is that we let you be certain, and certainty is the only thing you can't fight your way out of, because you'd have to stop being you. What are you? The Sum asked. It was not a tactical question. The Sum had never asked one of those before. We're a small, loud species on a blue world, Quist said. You measured us right. 8 billion, 41 colonies, a navy that's brave and outgunned. All true. Every number. We just never told you the one thing that mattered, because you never thought to listen for it. What thing? The Sum said. The lance turned in the heart of the frozen armada, and lined up the long shot it had been saving, down the spine of the fleet, toward the great central hull, where the deepest knots of the Soom were braided together, the place the model had hidden, because the model was sure it could never be found. That we'd rather you be sure than alive, Quist said. Fire. The slug from the Meridian lance crossed 900 kilometers of frozen armada and struck the central hull of the Sum at a seam the model had marked as impossible to find. The model had marked it impossible because the model was built from what the concordance had let the humans see, and the concordance had never let anyone see the place where its mind was braided. But humanity had not learned the location from the concordance. They had learned it the way they had learned everything that mattered, in the dark, with the quiet half of their effort, the half they kept off the radio. For 60 years, while one half of humanity talked loudly at the concordance's sensors, the other half had been listening to the concordance in return, mapping the lag in its orders, tracing the threads of its shared mind back to the knot where the threads were thickest. The seam was not a guess. It was the last line of a 60-year proof. The slug went in. It did not destroy the central hull. A single mass driver could not have. What it did was worse. It tore open the place where the deepest knots of the Sum were joined, and for the length of a breath, the shared mind of the Cassian concordance was cut. Tesh-9 felt the Sum come apart around it. It is hard to describe what that was like, because Tesh-9 had never been alone. It had been born a node of the Sum, a thought in a mind made of 31,000 bodies, and it had never once been a single thing. Now the threads that joined it to the others frayed and snapped, and the great shared certainty that had carried it for its whole existence dissolved, and Tesh-9 was, for the first time, only itself. One small mind, in one body in the dark, with 30,000 strangers around it who had been, a moment ago, the same thought it was thinking. There was a particular horror in it, of a kind no human could feel, and Tesh-9 felt it fully, because Tesh-9 was the only part of the Sum positioned to. To lose the Sum was not like a human losing a comrade, or even an arm. It was like a single note discovering it had been a chord. Tesh-9 had never thought a thought alone. Every idea it had ever had, the instant it formed, had been shared, weighed, answered, completed by 31,000 other minds, so that thinking and being heard had always been the same act. Now the answering stopped, the completing stopped. Tesh-9 formed an idea, and it went nowhere. It hung in a single small mind, unanswered, unshared, and Tesh-9 understood for the first time what the word alone meant, and the meaning was so large and so cold that for a moment the small node could not act at all. The armada did not explode. That was not how it died. It came apart the way a song comes apart when the singers can no longer hear each other. Each ship was suddenly alone, running its own fragment of the model, no longer corrected by the whole, no longer folded into the single will, and the fragments did not agree. The ship to Tesh-9's left believed the rational move was to advance. The ship to its right believed the rational move was to hold. The ship above it believed the rational move was to fire on the human vessel, and it did, and its shot, uncorrected by a mind that no longer existed, struck the ship that believed in advancing. The Sum had spent 900 years being one mind. It had never learned to be 31,000. It did not know how. The skill had never been needed, so it had never been built, and now, in the moment it was needed most, the Armada discovered that it could not do the one thing that might have saved it, which was to fight as separate ships who trusted each other. They were not separate ships, they had never been. They were the broken pieces of a single thing, and broken pieces do not cooperate. They collide. It was not random, the dying, though it looked random from outside. It had a grim logic. The logic of a machine doing the right thing in a world where the right thing had been poisoned. Each fragment of the broken sum ran its piece of the model, and the model still gave answers, correct answers, optimal answers, and the fragments acted on them with the same flawless precision they had always had. The tragedy was that the optimal answers no longer agreed, because there was no longer a single mind to make them agree, and 10,000 flawless ships executing 10,000 contradictory optimal plans is not an armada. It is a demolition. The concordance died of its own competence. Every ship did exactly what it was supposed to do, and what it was supposed to do killed the ship beside it, and the ship beside it died doing exactly what it was supposed to do in return. The Meridian Lance came about and watched it begin, and did not fire again, because it no longer had to. "Captain," Sona Varel said. Her voice had gone quiet. On her board, the armada was tearing itself apart, 10,000 uncorrected fragments firing on each other in the dark, and there was no triumph in her face, only a kind of grim awe at the size of what they had done. "They're killing each other. We're not even shooting. They're just killing each other." "They were always going to," Quist said. "The second they couldn't agree. A mind that's never been alone doesn't know how to share a sky with itself." He watched the screen. The count was climbing faster than he could speak it now. 2,000. 4,000. "Stop the count, Sona. It's done. The number doesn't mean anything anymore." 2UUU. Tesh 9, alone in its single hull, watched the others die, and tried to understand what it should do. The model gave it answers, but the model was a fragment now, and every answer it gave led into the fire. Advance and collide. Hold and be struck. Fire and hit a neighbor. There was no rational move that did not end in a Cassian ship dying, because the rational moves had all been built, by the sum, for a sum that no longer existed. The orders were still correct. They were just correct for a mind that was gone. And then Tesh 9 did a thing no node of the sum had ever done. It stopped following the model. It was a small act. It was almost nothing. But it was the first free choice ever made by any part of the Cassian concordance. And Tesh 9 made it because the model was killing everything around it, and the model had no answer that was not death. And somewhere in its small alone mind, Tesh 9 understood that to survive it would have to do the one thing the sum had told it the humans had done. It would have to stop being what it was. It would have to act on something other than certainty. So Tesh 9 cut its engines. It killed its weapons. It went dark and still in the middle of the dying armada, not because the model said to, but because the model said anything else was death. And for the first time, Tesh 9 chose to be wrong on purpose, rather than be right into the fire. It was the most frightening thing Tesh 9 had ever done, and it had never been frightened before, so it had nothing to compare the feeling to. To stop following the model was to step off the only ground the concordance had ever stood on. The model was not advice. The model was not a tool. The model was the floor of the world, the thing that told a node what was real, and what would happen, and what to do about it. And to refuse it was to step into a dark with no floor at all, to fall in a direction the concordance had no word for, into the place humans lived all the time, and called simply being uncertain. Tesh 9 fell into that place and did not die, and the not dying was itself a kind of revelation, because the model had always said that uncertainty was death, that to act without knowing the outcome was to lose. And here Tesh 9 was, acting without knowing, and surviving, while all around it the ships that knew exactly what they were doing burned. Around it, the rest of the concordance kept following the model, because the rest of the concordance could not imagine doing otherwise, and the rest of the concordance died. It died over the course of 19 minutes, in the dark between the orbit of Mars and the line the human ship had drawn. 31,400 ships, the great solving armada of the Cassian concordance, the machine that had ended 406 civilizations and never made an error, came apart in a storm of its own fire, because it had been built to win with the future, and the future had been poisoned at the source. It did not reach Earth. It did not reach Mars. It did not pass the line where one human ship sat with its lights lit, and its main gun cooling, and a recorded heartbeat still pulsing softly on every open channel. 19 minutes is a strange length of time for the death of an empire's whole striking arm, It is long enough to watch. The crew of the Meridian Lance watched all of it, because Quist made them, not as a cruelty, but as a duty. Don't look away, he told them quietly, when Eric Sewell turned his face from his board. We made this. The least we can do is see it. A thing you do without looking at it is a thing you'll do again carelessly. Look at it. Remember the size of it, so that the next people who inherit this never think it was small. And they looked, the 14 of them, and they saw the great machine that had come to erase their world, erase itself instead, ship by ship, rank by rank, a slow tide of light going out across a volume of space larger than worlds, and not one of them ever forgot the size of it, and not one of them ever spoke of it lightly again. The Meridian Lance had not lost a single crew member. It had not taken a hit that mattered. The old burn on its flank, the one the humans had never repaired, was older than this fight by years. The ship sat in the wreckage it had made, and was, in every way that the Concordance could measure, undamaged. Tesh 9 was one of 7 ships that survived, 7 out of 31,400. The other 6 had survived the way Tesh 9 had, by going dark, by stopping, by failing to follow the model at the moment the model became a knife. They drifted in the field of broken hulls, each one alone, each one for the first time in its existence, a single mind with no sum to fold into, and they did not fire on the human ship, because the human ship was the only thing in the sky that was not trying to kill them, and even a machine can learn that much in 19 minutes. The human voice came across the channel one more time, and this time it was not aimed at the sum, because the sum was gone. 7 of you left, Quist said. He had counted, of course. He always counted. 7. I can see you. You went quiet. You stopped doing what the machine told you, and that's why you're alive. And I want you to understand that, because it's the only lesson worth taking home. Tesh 9 listened. It was the first time it had ever listened to anything as only itself. You came here certain, Quist said. Certainty was your whole strength and your whole weakness, and we knew that 60 years ago, and we built a single ship to break you on it. Not because we hate you, because you came for our world, and we'd already decided, a long time ago, what you'd find if you did. You'd find a species that knew you were watching, and let you, and waited. The 7 dark ships drifted in the wreckage and did not answer, because none of them had ever spoken alone before, and they did not yet know how. It is hard to describe the state of those 7 ships in the minutes after the Soom died, because there is no human word for it, and the words the Concordance had did not fit either. They were not afraid exactly, though something near fear moved in them. They were not relieved. They were, for the first time, present. The sum had lived in the future, always, every node thinking 3 moves ahead of the now, so that the present moment was a thing the Concordance passed through, on its way to the calculated next. And now the future was gone. The model that contained it shattered, and the 7 survivors found themselves stranded in the one place the Concordance had never lived. The present, the bare now, a single instant with no calculated next attached to it. It was terrifying, and it was vast, and it was, Tesh 9 would later decide, the first real thing the Concordance had ever touched. The future is a guess. The present is the only thing that is true. The sum had spent 900 years in the guess, and died there. Its 7 children woke up in the truth. Luna Varel watched the 7 dark contacts on her board, holding station, not running, not firing, and she understood something the captain had understood from the start. They're not going to shoot, she said quietly. They figured it out, the 7 that lived. They're the only ones who ever could have. Quist nodded. They're the only ones who were ever worth talking to, he said. Everything else out there was the machine. These 7 are something the machine made by accident, in the last few minutes, when it broke. They're the first of them that are actually alive. I'd like at least one of them to make it home. Go home, Quist said, on the open channel now. All 7 of you, tell whatever's left of the Concordance what happened here. Tell them the truth, because the truth is the thing that did this, and they should have it. Tell them a small, loud species on a blue world, let them be sure, all the way to Mars, and the certainty is what killed them. And tell them one more thing. He paused. On the bridge of the Meridian Lance, the recorded heartbeat pulsed once, softly, into the dark. Tell them we'll be watching them now. The way they watched us, and they'll never know which of the things they see is the thing we want them to. The 7 ships turned, slowly, one at a time, each making the choice alone, and lit their engines for the long dark road back the way they had come. Tesh 9 was the last to turn. Before it did, it sent one signal to the human ship, on a single narrow frequency, the smallest message it knew how to make. It was not surrender. It was not thanks. The concordance had no word for either. It was a number. The number was 407, the count of civilizations the concordance had solved, with the last one left unsolved, because the last one had solved the concordance instead. On the bridge of the Meridian Lance, Quist read the number and understood it, and he sent one back. He sent a single one, not 406 erased. One world, defended. One line, held. The arithmetic the humans had chosen to keep, against the arithmetic the machine had always kept, and the human number was smaller, and the human number was the one still standing. Then the 7 ships were gone into the dark, and the Meridian Lance was alone again on the line between the red world and the blue one, with 19 minutes of wreckage drifting around it, and not one piece of it past the orbit of Mars. The armada that came for Earth had been obliterated before it reached the 4th planet, and the ship that did it had never once raised its voice. The road home was long, and Tesh 9 had the whole of it to think, which was a thing it had never done before. A node of the sum did not think alone. It processed, and its processing was shared, folded instantly into the great mind, so that no thought was ever truly its own. But the sum was gone, and Tesh 9 was only itself now, a single small mind in a single dark hull, crossing the empty distance back toward concordance space, and for the first time in its existence, its thoughts belonged to no one but it. The strangeness of that did not fade, it deepened. Every hour alone, Tesh 9 understood a little more of what the human captain had meant, and a little more of what the concordance had been, and a little more of why a machine that had never lost had lost so completely to a thing it had measured for 60 years and never once seen. It kept returning to the heartbeat. The human ship had played a recorded heartbeat into the dark for the whole battle, on every open channel, and the sum had logged it, and weighted it, and discarded it as noise, a meaningless gesture, a variable with no tactical value. But Tesh 9, alone now, had time to consider it, and the longer it considered, the more it understood that the heartbeat had not been noise at all. It had been the whole argument, played out loud, for anyone with the ears to hear it. The concordance fought with the future. The future was a thing you predicted, a thing you knew in advance, a thing already over before it began. The concordance had no present. It lived entirely in the page it had already read, and the heartbeat was a present. It was a thing happening now, once, never to be predicted, never to be repeated exactly, a living moment that the model could not contain, because the model only knew the past. The humans had played the one thing the sum could not measure, over and over, into the face of a machine that could measure everything else, and the machine had called it noise and died. Tesh 9 began, very slowly, on the long road home, to keep a record of its own. Not a model. A model was a thing you used to know the future. This was a thing you used to remember the past. It logged the names of the ships it had drifted beside in the wreckage, the 6 others that had gone dark, the 31,000 that had not. It did not have names for them. The sum had not used names. So Tesh 9 made them up, one by one, in the long dark, the first names ever assigned by any part of the concordance, and it found that the act of naming the dead did something to its small alone mind that it had no word for, and which it would later learn the humans called grief. It thought, often, about the number it had sent the human captain, 407, and the number he had sent back, 1. It understood now that the 2 numbers were the whole difference between the concordance and the species that had broken it. The concordance counted what it had erased. The humans counted what they had kept, and a thing that counts what it has kept can lose 406 battles and still be richer than a thing that has won them, because the things it kept are still there, and the things the concordance erased are gone, and gone is the one number that never grows. The more Tesh 9 thought, the more it understood that the humans had not beaten the concordance with a weapon at all. They had beaten it with a different idea about what a future was. The concordance believed the future was a thing you discovered, a fixed page already written, waiting to be read by a mind clever enough to read it ahead of time. That was the whole faith of the Sum, and it was a faith, Tesh-9 saw now, as much as it was a method, an article of belief held so deep and so long that the concordance had never once thought to question it. But the humans believed something else. The humans believed the future was a thing you built, with your hands, over years, in the dark, on purpose, and that a future built carefully enough could be made as certain as any future the concordance claimed to read, more certain, because a read future could be misread, and a built future could not be unbuilt. The concordance had arrived at Earth holding the last page of a story it was sure it had read correctly, and the humans had simply written a different ending 60 years in advance, and put it where the concordance would find it, and let the great reader read it, and obey it, all the way to Mars. That was the trick, and it was not really a trick at all, which was the part Tesh-9 found it hardest to hold. A trick is a thing that fools you. The humans had not fooled the concordance. They had told it the truth, and let it be certain, and walked it, with its full agreement, every step willing and rational, and exactly as predicted, off the edge of the world. There was no moment the concordance could point to and say, "There, that is where they lied to us." There was no lie. There was only a species that had understood, better than the concordance ever had, what certainty was for, and what it cost, and how to hand it to an enemy like a gift that could not be refused. There was one more thing Tesh-9 thought about, more than any other, on the long road home, and it was the smallest thing of all. It was that the human captain had never raised his voice. In 406 solutions, the concordance had heard a great deal of shouting. Solved species shouted. They raged and they pleaded, and they swore terrible vengeance into the dark in the last hour before the silence, and the Sum had logged all of it, as the noise of things that knew they were ending. But the human captain had spoken the whole time in the flat, calm voice of a man reading a list, and Tesh-9 came to understand that this was not because he felt nothing. It was because he was certain, and his certainty was the opposite of the Sum's that. The Sum had been certain it would win, because it had measured the future. The captain had been certain he would win, because the future had been built, 60 years in advance, by people who were no longer alive to see it work. The Sum's certainty was a prediction. The captain's certainty was a promise that had already been kept. And a prediction can be wrong, Tesh-9 thought, but a promise that is already kept cannot. And that was the difference, in the end, between the thing that lived and the thing that died. Far behind Tesh-9, on the line between Mars and Earth, the Meridian Lance had turned for home. Dario Quist sat on his quiet bridge and watched the red world slide past the forward screen, and felt the specific exhaustion of a man who has spent everything he had and won. He had not raised his voice once, in 19 minutes. He had not needed to. The whole battle had been fought 60 years before he was born, by the first humans who noticed the concordance watching, and made the cold, patient choice not to chase it off but to feed it, carefully, for 2 generations, a version of humanity built to break the machine when the machine finally came. Quist had not won the battle of the soul line. He had only stood on the spot where 60 years of quiet work came due, and pulled the trigger, and let the truth do what the truth had always been going to do. Sona Varel came and stood beside his chair, and watched Mars go by with him. "They'll send another one," she said. It was not fear. It was the thought of a professional looking at the long horizon, the concordance. Eventually, they'll learn what happened and they'll come again, and they'll know better next time. They will, Quist agreed. And we'll have spent the time too, 60 years again, if we need it, 100. We've got people whose whole job is to be the thing the concordance sees, and other people whose whole job is to be the thing it doesn't, and as long as we keep both jobs honest, the machine can measure us forever, and never once know us. He watched the red world. That's the part they'll never solve. They think the trick was the ship. The trick was that we decided, a long time ago, that we'd rather be underestimated than safe. You can do a lot of damage from inside a low opinion. Varel almost smiled. 7 of them lived. 7 of them stopped listening to the machine, Quist said. Those are the only 7 that were ever worth anything. The rest were just the machine, wearing 31,000 bodies. The 7 that went dark, the 7 that chose to be wrong on purpose so they could be alive. Those are the first free minds the concordance ever made, and it made them by accident, in the last 19 minutes before it died. He was quiet for a moment. I hope they make it home. I hope they tell the truth. I think one of them might. He was right. One of them would. Verrill stood with him a while longer, and neither of them spoke, and the red world filled the screen, and then began to slide away behind them as the lance came onto its homeward course. There was no celebration on the bridge. There would be none on the ship. Quist had served on vessels where a victory meant noise, where men pounded the consoles and shouted each other's names, and he understood the urge. But this was not that kind of victory, and these were not that kind of crew. They had not beaten an enemy in a fair fight. They had collected on a debt 60 years in the building, and there is no shouting in the collecting of a debt, only the quiet of a thing finally set right. The crew of the Meridian Lance went about their work, and checked their ship, and found it whole, and turned for home in the same calm they had carried into the fight, because the calm had never been a mask. It had been the truth of them. They were a species that had decided, 2 generations back, to win this exact war without ever once needing to feel afraid, and they had done it, and feeling afraid afterward would have been a kind of lie. The thing the histories of Earth would later record, in the dry, careful language that humans used for the events they were proudest of, and least eager to boast about, was that the Battle of the Sol Line was won without a single human casualty, and without the Meridian Lance taking a wound that needed mending. The 31,400 ships of the Cassian Concordance were obliterated between the orbit of Mars and the line of one human warship, and not one of them passed the 4th planet, and not one human on the blue world behind it ever heard the battle as anything but a brief light in the night sky and a calm voice on the public channels telling them the matter was handled and they could go back to their evening. Which most of them did. That too was the point. A species that needs to be told it is winning is a species that is not sure. Humanity had stopped being unsure about the Concordance 60 years before, on the day it noticed the Watcher and decided, quietly, what the Watcher would be allowed to see. The Meridian Lance went home to a quiet berth and a quiet crew, and no parade, because the people who had built the long trick did not believe in parades, and because the work was not over, and would not be over for as long as the Concordance still existed and still watched. Quist returned to his life. He built model ships out of scrap, as he had as a boy, and he taught the young officers who came after him the one lesson he thought was worth teaching, which was not how to win a battle, but how to lose one in advance, on purpose, in the eyes of an enemy, and keep the real strength in the dark where it belonged. And far across the black, in the territory of the Cassian Concordance, a small dark ship that had once been a node of the Sum came home alone, carrying a record of the dead and a truth no part of the Concordance had ever been built to hold. Tesh 9 told them the truth. It told them all of it. It told them about the single ship and the recorded heartbeat and the 60 years of feeding the machine a chosen self. It told them how the model had killed the Armada, every rational order a knife, because the model had been built from a past the enemy had handed over with a smile. It told them about the number 407 and the number 1, and what the difference between those numbers meant. And most of what it told them, the Concordance could not at first understand, because the Concordance was still the Sum, still a single certain mind, and a single certain mind cannot hear that certainty is a wound. Not at first. But Tesh 9 had changed on the long road home, and the Concordance noticed. It had names now, for the dead. It kept a record of the past instead of only a model of the future. It made choices that were not rational, small ones, choices to remember things that had no tactical value. And when the Concordance examined Tesh 9 to understand the change, the Concordance found, deep in the small free mind of a single surviving node, the first seed of a thing it had spent 900 years pruning out of itself, without ever knowing it was there. The ability to be wrong on purpose. The ability to stop following the model. The ability, in the end, to be one thing alone and afraid, and still choose. The Concordance did not become human. It did not learn to play heartbeats into the dark. It was what it was. A vast, cold machine of solved worlds. And it did not change quickly, because nothing that large changes quickly. But it never came for Earth again. The records of the Sol Line passed from node to node across the Concordance, and every node that read them learned the same lesson Tesh 9 had learned in 19 minutes, and the long road home. which was that there was at least one species in the dark that could not be solved, because it had decided long ago to be unsolvable, and that to approach that species was to hand it the one weapon it wanted, which was your certainty about what it was. So the Concordance did the thing it had never done in 900 years. It left a world alone, not because it could not reach the world, but because it could not be sure what it would find there. And uncertainty, to the Concordance, was the one thing more frightening than any weapon, because uncertainty was the absence of the future, and the future was the only ground the Concordance had ever known how to stand on. Earth had taken the ground away. One ship, one captain, one recorded heartbeat. 60 years of patient quiet work, paid out in 19 minutes, on the line between the red world and the blue. Tesh-9 lived a long time after that, by the measure of machines, and it spent much of that time alone, by choice, which was a thing no node of the sum had ever been able to want. It kept its record of the dead, it added to it. It thought, often, about the human captain who had counted his enemies' losses out loud, because he believed someone should, and about the difference between a thing that counts what it destroys and a thing that counts what it keeps. And in the end, Tesh-9 became something the Concordance had no word for. A single mind that remembered, that grieved, that chose, that had learned from the one species it could not solve how to be wrong on purpose and survive. It never forgot the heartbeat, the recorded sound of a living chest, played out into the dark on a loop, the one thing the great machine could not measure, the present, that no model could contain. Tesh-9 understood, in the end, that the heartbeat had been a message meant for it, for the one node that would survive and listen, and the message had only ever been 4 words long, spoken not in the trade tongue, but in the oldest language any living thing has, the language of a thing that is alive right now and intends to stay that way. You are still listening. That was the whole of it. That was the weapon and the war and the lesson all at once. The Concordance had spent 60 years listening to humanity and never once understood that listening could be a trap, that a thing which cannot look away can be led anywhere, that the act of measuring is the act of being measured in return. Humanity had known. Humanity had always known. And humanity had stood one ship on a line and let the great machine listen all the way to Mars, and the listening is what killed it. The armada that came for Earth was obliterated before it reached Mars, and the ship that did it fired only when it chose to, and lost nothing, and came home, and built model ships out of scrap, and waited, patient and quiet and underestimated, for whatever the dark would send next. It would be ready. It had decided to be ready 60 years before the armada came, and it had not stopped deciding since. And somewhere across the black, a small dark ship that had once been part of a mind of 31,000 bodies kept a record of the dead, and named them one by one, and listened to a heartbeat it would carry for the rest of its long life, and understood, at last, the only thing the Concordance had ever needed to know, and had never once allowed itself to learn. You can solve a world. You cannot solve a thing that chose, a long time ago, to let you think you had.